Good day to you, and welcome to our new online reality for Radio Practicum. You know, there's an old saying in radio that if you want to find out who's making the most money, all you have to do is go out in the parking lot and look at who's driving the nicest cars. And the answer is without a doubt, it's the sales staff. The sales staff of a radio station comprises approximately 50% of that staff. And that's what we're focusing on today in Radio Practicum. We're talking about radio sales. Because radio commercials, which is what you're selling, is what keeps radio stations running. Radio station commercials bring in the income that pay the salaries, that pay the building maintenance fees, that pay the copyright licensing, that purchase the equipment, that invest back to the stockholders. It's radio sales that is the economic engine for radio station. And also radio sales is the most direct path these days to becoming a radio station manager. It used to be the case that radio station managers came out of programming. They were program directors, they were music directors, they were disc jockeys. Today, it's people most likely to have an MBA and to have come from the radio sales division. So let's talk about radio sales by first talking about what it's like to sell airtime. Well, it's not easy because a radio commercial is intangible. It's not something that you can see and hold. It is intangible. This wallet here, I can see and hold it. It's got a physical feeling to it. If I go in and try and sell this to somebody, they can look at it and they can see the value of it based on its condition. But a radio commercial is much different. It's air. It's sound. And yet a very strong radio ad can make an incredibly lasting impression upon a listeners. I'll ask you right now to hear the Intel jingle in your head. You can do it, right? Dun, 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 dun. You can also sing the Liberty Mutual insurance commercial, right? Liberty, 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 liberty. These are great examples of radio jingles that once you're in your head, they ricochet around there and you can hardly get rid of them. It's a very effective form of advertising radio if you can construct the right kind of content. Now, it's not easy for selling airtime just because radio ads are intangible. It's also because radio is competing not just with other radio stations, but with other media for ad dollars. And that means that you're going into a local business and you're trying to sell a radio ad right after somebody from a newspaper has been in there, right after somebody who's putting out a local flyer has been in there, right after somebody who is on a television at a television station has been in that business, also seeking the same business. So it's extremely competitive. I talked recently to the general manager of WSBG Radio, and he tells me that most ad sales, in fact, most of the revenue for radio stations, is no longer coming from the content that radio stations are selling on the air, which is to say selling ads on the air, although that is still a main economic engine for radio stations. Most of the revenue today for radio stations is coming from the web page. It's coming from people going to a radio station's web page like it's a community gathering place, and then from there clicking through to another link that is advertising sponsored. And that clicking through process is what is generating the revenue for radio stations. So this is a brand new area of sales for radio that has been opened up by the internet. The last point I want to make about selling airtime is since so many people are listening to radio in their cars, 98% of radio listening goes on in a vehicle. Since so many people are listening to radio in their cars, ideally what you're trying to do with most radio ads is get them from their car into a store or into a fast food restaurant or onto the lot of a car dealership. Because people have the ability to act on their vehicle when they're in their vehicle. They can suddenly hear an ad and be inspired to hit that turn signal, pull off the highway, and drive to wherever what is being sold is being advertised. Now let's talk about the person who sells radio ad time. That's an AE, also known as an account executive, an AE. It's a position that is making the most money for an entry-level position in radio. It's also a position that has a high turnover rate. 70% of a sales staff within a 3-year cycle have moved on to another radio station. They've gone to another radio station or a bigger market radio station or another media enterprise in sales altogether, or they've left the industry. There's a high turnover because people are trying to move up and they use sales as an entry-level position and then they move on to another position. An AE person, an account executive, needs to have an understanding of research, marketing, and financing. How you can provide financing to somebody who wants to buy ads but who doesn't have the money up front. So you need to have a wealth of tools in your backpack. Well, you're not carrying a backpack. You need to have a wealth of tools in whatever kit you're bringing with you. It's very common today for AEs to have a college degree. And AEs, when they're hired, they're expected to generate new business. That's one of the reasons that they're hired. You're hired to develop the business account with Walmart or with the local hardware store or the local car dealership that the radio station doesn't currently have an account with. Some AEs are even hired under a quote, no strings salary option. That means that for the first few months, as you establish your accounts, you're going to be given a salary until such time as your accounts start bringing in profits, and then you will be put on a commission basis. Ultimately, an AE needs to know radio, and you need to know your client's business. As you drive past Halterman's Toyota car dealership every day, you're studying that. You're seeing what cars are not moving on that lot. You see that Prius that hasn't been moving in there? That's going to be an idea for you to pitch a potential radio sales ad. Now let's move to the next position in sales. That's the sales manager, also known as the general sales manager. This is a person who directs the activities of the account executives, the AEs. This person, the sales manager, is developing incentives all the time for a sales staff. So you'll have a meeting with your staff and you're going to say, okay, whoever has the highest volume of sales for this month of March is going to win these free 2 tickets on Carnival Cruise to Jamaica. That's the way that radio station sales general managers try, amongst other ways, to develop incentives to drive those numbers higher. Also, the general sales manager, I should say, works with national companies. That means the Verizons, the Geicos, the Allstates, the McDonald's, the Cokes. These are international companies, and they're looking for radio stations in a market that are going to be able to carry their message to the right demographic of people. And so radio station general sales managers, they work with rep companies. Rep companies are companies that represent radio stations, and they go out looking for ads from national sales. And that's one of the other jobs that a sales manager does. Also, the sales manager develops goals for the department, sales goals, volume goals, inventory. Keep in mind that a radio ad is a very different kind of inventory than, say, a shirt that you'll find at Tommy Hilfiger at the outlets. When you look at most inventory of most businesses, it's products that you physically stock. And at the end of the month, if you're not selling a certain color of a shirt, you put it on clearance or you send it back to the manufacturer. In radio, the inventory is so different. The inventory is time, and it is always escaping you. If you don't sell the 1 p.m. slot that is tomorrow, that's Friday, that's open right now, it has not been sold, a 1 p.m. 30-second radio ad slot has not been sold. If 1 p.m. rolls around tomorrow, that slot is gone forever. You cannot send it back to the manufacturer. You cannot rearrange it on the shelf. You cannot put it on clearance. You can't put it on clearance before 1 o'clock p.m. tomorrow comes. You can discount it, but it's a very different kind of inventory management that you're doing. Also, the radio station sales manager is very adept at working the numbers for the radio station. You'll find that every radio station in the entire United States can claim that they are number one. They're number one amongst this particular demographic, females 18 to 25, males 25 to 54. You can find what your number one is. And so that's what the radio station sales manager job is to do, is to finesse those numbers to present the strongest case for somebody buying an ad. Now let's talk about radio sales tools. Radio sales tools, we're talking now about the account executive going out into the field. You're going out, you're meeting with people, you're making phone calls, and once you arrive, what are your tools to make a sale? Well, the first tool that you have is called a rate card. A rate card. I'm providing a link for that in the email that I'm sending out today to show you what it looks like. A rate card is a grid, and it shows you the cost of ads during different day parts. A day part is that part of the day that is divided up so that disc jockeys work their shifts. You've got a day part of 6 to 10 in the morning. That's known as the morning drive day part. That's the radio's peak audience. That's when most people are listening to radio, from 6 to 10 in the morning. That also happens to be, therefore, when radio ads can charge the most, because the audience is the biggest. So the rate card breaks down these day parts and then shows how much an ad costs. The rate card also shows if you buy more ads, how much your ad costs can be discounted. It's like anything. You buy in bulk, you can bring that price down. So rate ad cards are one particular kind of tool, and discounting spots is a tool within that tool. Another tool is called rate protection. When a business buys an ad, they are buying an ad based on Nielsen rating numbers showing what your demographics are for your radio station. And if you buy an ad for next fall, and then fall rolls around and the numbers of the radio station have dropped, and so you're reaching less people than you thought you were going to reach when you produce the ad, that's when you get rate protection. That's when the radio station will automatically lower the cost of the ad, or they'll throw in extra ads to try and make up for the drop in audience. So now let's move on to the pitch. This is the pitch is the AE's way of trying to convince a client to, or trying to convince a business to become a client. And so you go to the business and you make a pitch. And rarely are radio sales done on the first pitch. Normally it takes more than just one pitch. You have to determine your client's needs beforehand. And so you're studying that Prius. You're doing market research on the Toyota Prius. You're seeing who that Toyota Prius appeals to, and you're trying to find a way to get in there and make a pitch. Listen, we think that we can move all these Priuses on your lot because you're not really appealing to young professional females who are environmentally conscious. And that audience is one that would be very likely to purchase a Prius. So we're going to develop a radio spot for you to try and make that sale. That's what a pitch is all about. Usually it takes third and fourth calls and sometimes fifth calls to see if you're going to get any traction. So it takes a lot of perseverance, right? If you're in radio sales, you have to keep going back and hearing no, 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 maybe. Maybe. Let me show you what I can do. Now let's talk about the different levels of sales. The first level of sales is called retail sales. Retail sales is a one-on-one relationship between the radio station and the advertiser. The advertiser is existing within the signal range of the radio station. So WSBG, the biggest commercial radio station in town, the signal radius is approximately 30 miles. So businesses that AEs visit within the 30 miles, that's going to be retail sales. The commission for an AE is usually 15%. So if you sell a radio spot for $100, that's $15 for the AE. Now let's go on to local sales. That's the next level of sales. Local sales is working with an ad agency. An ad agency is an entity that's kind of like a rep company, except the ad agency is working for the advertisers. The ad agency is working for Coke, for Verizon, for McDonald's. And what the ad agency is doing is saying, we have a campaign, let's say it's a new dollar value meal at McDonald's, and we need to find the radio stations that have the demographics that are going to be most likely to purchase this product. And so that's where the ad agency comes in. The Coke can't know all of the radio formats in the Philadelphia and the New York markets and which one is best for their brand new product. And that's what the advertising agency is about. And sometimes ad agencies produce the commercials. Now let's go on to national sales. This is that third level. This is where the general sales manager works with the radio station's rep company, which I mentioned earlier, to secure buys from big national, international companies. All right, I'd like to move on to the quote-unquote spec spot now, S-P-E-C, specs standing for specification spot. This is a spot that you will produce to try and entice a client to purchase advertising. They're either a client who's purchased advertising for one particular product and you're trying to get them to purchase for another product, or they are not a client at all and they might be a client. And so what you do is you actually produce an ad. You produce an ad for that Prius and you take it to the radio station, or you email them you take it to the car dealership, or you email them an MP3 file and you say, take a listen, this is what we can do for you. All right, now let's move on to prospecting and list building. Prospecting is all about building that list of clients. As I mentioned earlier, AEs usually are brought on to develop new clients, and they're also usually handed a list of inactive clients. Those are businesses that advertised in the past that are not advertising now. And we're going to see a lot of that after the coronavirus because so many small businesses have been scorched by having to shut down. Whether the congressional funding that's going to provide relief to them will allow them to get back fully into their business operations, only time will tell, but we're going to probably see a lull in radio advertising from that point of view. However, where we will see an increase, an uptick in radio advertising, which radio stations just live for, is political campaigns. And we certainly have that coming up in the fall. Whether the coronavirus is around or not, you can expect to hear tons of radio commercials for political candidates. That's just money rolling into a radio station. When you develop a new account as an AE for your list, that account becomes, quote, declared. That means it is assigned by a manager to a specific AE. So if you happen to have gotten the Walmart account, then no other AE can come in your building and sell advertising time to that AE. Now let's talk about the average sales day for an AE. Usually the AE is making between 75 and 100 in-person calls a week. You're speaking to 100 potential businesses every single week. That's about 15 to 20 every single day. The night before, you're planning your route. You're deciding, I'm not going to drive to Scranton to talk to True Value Hardware, and then down to Water Gap to talk to a pizza place, and then back up to Scott Run to talk to Great Wolf Lodge. That doesn't make sense. That's driving too much, expending too much gas. So you've got to plan out your route so that you cluster all of your appointments wherever you're going. The telephone is an absolutely essential tool to being a successful AE. I also want to mention that AEs are selling website and podcast advertising as well. That's banner advertising and pop-up advertising, and this is increasingly happening. Now let's talk about co-op advertising. Co-op advertising is the way that many radio stations build their infrastructure. Let me erase that. That's for the next kind of advertising. That's called a trade out. I skipped ahead on my notes there. Co-op advertising. What is co-op advertising? It stands for cooperative advertising. Cooperative advertising is where a retailer and a manufacturer share the cost of producing a commercial. Let's say, for example, that GMC is rolling out a brand new truck and they want to advertise that truck. Well, it's not just to the benefit of GMC, which is with its manufacturing plant in Michigan, to have increased sales for that truck. Instead, what GMC will realize is that it's also to the benefit of the local dealer who is selling that Silverado truck or whatever that truck is. And so the local dealer, the local Chevy dealer, is going to split that cost. It may not be 50-50, but they're going to share that cost, split it some way with the manufacturer, so it brings it down for both of them. Now let's finish up with our final item for radio sales today, and that is known as the trade out, also known as barters. A barter is where you're trading not money for radio airtime, but you're trading goods and services. I do this for my radio talk show. It is allowed even in the non-commercial radio sector. I do this with the Pocono Record. I give a mention during my talk show of the Pocono Record. I say that this program is sponsored by the Pocono Record. Guests for the talk show appear in every Tuesday's edition of the Pocono Record. That's my sponsorship. In exchange, the Pocono Record prints an ad for my radio talk show every Tuesday. And that's what bartering is all about. Radio stations build their entire infrastructure sometimes through bartering. All of the furnishings inside of a radio station, couches, cabinets, etc., a lot of times those aren't purchased. Those are traded with a company so that the radio station will advertise that company. And there's a long view towards barters as well. A lot of times barters are struck so that later the trade agreement may turn into a cash agreement. That once you have all the furniture you need, that furniture company, Monarch Furniture, for example, is going to sign on for a radio ad campaign. So there you have it, the occupation in radio that is the most transient with people moving throughout it, but it's also the occupation where people are tending to make the most money. It's radio sales. And now I'm going to ask you to respond to this lecture on D2L by developing a 200-word discussion post talking about what you learned about radio sales and some other observations that you have on your own. This will all be put in the email today. Have a great day.